This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, you tweeted something that worried me quite a bit, and I mean that beyond my general resting state of anxiety. So you tweeted, big council change in right-wing lawsuit to strike down anti-harassment provisions of Arizona's election procedural manual. Out is small Arizona firm. In is Arizona office of Washington, D.C. firm with close ties to the GOP. And then you wrote that this is an ominous turn and one worth watching. Should we be worried here?
Yeah, we should be very worried. You and I have talked a lot about the role of lawyers in facilitating Donald Trump's crazy election denialism and the threats that election officials have been facing and that voters may face at the polls in 2024. And, one of the things that I've been watching carefully is who are the lawyers who are still on board the Team Trump? Right after all of the activities in 2020 and the indictments and the disbarments, who are the lawyers signing up now? And what we have seen in Arizona is an alarming development, which is rather than this lawsuit being lawyered by another one of these small law firms in Arizona that, we've talked a lot about before, jumping into this case is one of the most prominent Republican law firms in the country, a law firm that frankly had represented Chris Christie in the most recent primary election against Donald Trump. This was not a traditional Donald Trump law firm, but it looks like they have now thrown in the towel. They are now joining into the band of misfit lawyers who are part of Team Trump.
Why are they investing resources into this? Like, what do Republicans stand to gain by doubling down on these harassment provisions, for example, which is the issue at the heart of this case?
Look, I think that one of it is that these law firms have realized that there is no place left in the Republican Party unless you are on the Trump team and unless you are part of the election denial movement. And, I think it's not a surprise that this change came at the same time that the Republican Party threw Ronna McDaniel overboard, brought in Michael Whatley, who is a lawyer from North Carolina, on an explicit platform to be more aggressive in peddling election denialism, to be more aggressive in voter suppression, and brought Laura Trump on board to be the co-chair of the Republican Party. I think the message was clear. If you are a law firm who wants to do business in the Republican Party, there is only one ticket now. There's no longer a place to be a never Trumper. There's no longer a place even to be a just not that into Trump. You are either a full-blown member of the Trump mafia, so to speak, or there's no place for you.
Yeah. And by the way, for those looking to learn more about this Republican scheme, Mark has a new piece up on Democracy Docket called Republicans Are Suing for the Right to Harass Election Workers. So I'll put the link to that right here on the screen. You can also sign up for Democracy Docket right on that link as well. Mark, how much of an impact can more competent lawyers have on a case that should go nowhere like this one?
Yeah, so look, I'm very worried because the Republican Party is upgrading the quality of its lawyers in some respects. I'll say this law firm is a much better set of lawyers than some of the law firms that they've had. And I've written about this before on Democracy Docket. When Whatley took over, he made Charlie Spees, who was also a never Trumper in the past, their in-house general counsel. And, that is a bad thing for people who care about democracy. He brought on board as his outside counsel for these efforts, a guy named Bill McGinley, also a competent lawyer. He had been in the Trump cabinet, but, was not as closely aligned with the crazies as some of the others. So I'm worried that the co-opting of the last pieces of the Republican establishment and the last pieces of the Republican legal establishment will mean that they have more resources and more lawyers available to try to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. I also think that we have to keep our eye on the kinds of litigation, not just the volume of the litigation that we see out of the RNC and others. But as you mentioned, I wrote this article. There are 3 lawsuits that have been filed in the last few months, literally trying to strike down laws to protect election workers from harassment. I mean, states are responding to a unprecedented wave of harassment and doxing at their local election officials. And the states are trying to pass laws that simply say you cannot harass people who work the polls. You cannot follow them out to their cars and videotape them. You cannot shout at them. You cannot do things to disrupt them from doing their jobs. And you see law firms and lawyers and groups. I'm not saying this law firm in particular, but in general, you see a growth industry of litigation now targeting to strike down these laws. I mean, who's in favor of harassing election officials? Well, I'll tell you who. People who support Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're the ones, by the way, who know that they're going to be the ones doing the harassing and that no one's going to harass them. And so it's just this complete asymmetry that they're taking full advantage of with the Republican legal establishment behind them now.
Right. And it's what I mean, it's no different than what we're seeing Donald Trump do in court right now. Right. I mean, Donald Trump is sending a signal by harassing witnesses in his criminal trial, by spreading lies about the judge and the judge's family, by violating court gag orders. Right, he is modeling behavior that thuggishness and intimidation is a technique that is not only tolerated but to be embraced by him and his supporters and by the Republican Party. So it is a very, very troubling development that we see him doing this in criminal courts, but it's even worse when it's targeting these election officials around the country.
Mark, when will we have the first indication of whether this strategy for Republicans works? When's the first time that they're going to go to court with this new beefed up legal apparatus so that we can kind of see whether it actually pans out for them, whether better lawyers will actually equate to more success in the courtroom?
Look, the good news is my team and we're fighting them in court. My law firm is fighting them in court everywhere they are. We're right now in more than 50 lawsuits in more than 20 states. So I don't want people to lose hope. We're going to defeat them. They're going to lose these cases. But it is a worrisome development that there seem to be more resources and more lawyers and better lawyers willing to sign onto this cause. Because even if we beat them in court now, and we can beat them in court after the election, what does it mean when we get to the next January 6th? That rather than this being a waning movement, we see more and more elites within the Republican Party, and lawyers are part of the elites. There is less resistance to Donald Trump and another insurrection on January 6th today than there was 4 years ago. And that is a troubling development. You would have thought that the disbarment and the humiliation that the Eastmans and the Giuliani's faced would have dissuaded this, but it hasn't.
Yeah. Mark, for posterity here, because this case is all centered around the election procedure manual, can you talk about what's at stake in general if this lawsuit seeking to throw out Arizona's election procedure manual succeeds for Republicans? Because I think this pretty perfectly encapsulates the mayhem that Republicans are trying to usher in.
Yeah, and it is mayhem that they're trying to usher in. I mean, the election procedure manual in Arizona is in the past is just a boring document that is put together that helps local election officials and county election officials know how to mechanically run an election, how to open the polls, how to close the polls, where to put up signage, right? It's literally what it sounds like. It's a manual to administer elections. It's not a controversial document, but yet we are witnessing an unprecedented attack on this. There are 3 separate lawsuits filed already challenging this election procedure manual. The one we've been talking about, another lawsuit filed by the Republican National Committee that wants to throw the entire manual out. They want the whole manual tossed out.
What's your analogy to the street with road signs on it?
Yeah, it would literally be like saying, let's just remove all the speed signs, turn signs, and traffic signals. We don't need red lights, we don't need green lights, we don't need stop signs, we don't need speed signs. Just like people drive.
And the goal here is just to usher in so much pandemonium that they can then say that they can then use that pandemonium as a predicate to say, look, the elections aren't working. We have, and then give themselves carte blanche to usher in whatever, chaotic solutions that they want to impose for themselves that will benefit themselves.
That's right. This litigation in Arizona is the clearest example of the Republican strategy of creating chaos, making our elections harder to administer, leading them to fail in some respects. On the Republican side, they hope they fail entirely so that they can then claim that the Republican legislature of Arizona can appoint whoever they want to be the electors, that the election results are unreliable, that you cannot trust the vote totals, and they are trying to do that by undermining the basic rules of the road for how you conduct elections in Arizona.
And I think it's so important to focus on this now, because the last thing that we want is for 6 months down the line, something like that to happen and everybody to turn around and say, why weren't we paying attention 6 months ago? Like, this is the case. This is what it's being born out of. This is their attempt right now to usher this in. We're seeing it at the ground floor. This is them attempting to set the stage for what will ultimately be that major, major battle against democracy that would happen just a few months from now.
Yeah, I can't say this enough times. Republicans' only strategy for 2024 is to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. They do not have an answer to the abortion question. They have boxed themselves into an untenable position on immigration when Joe Biden and the Democrats were willing to give them everything they wanted. And then they turned on James Lankford and said, we don't want anything. And Donald Trump said, blame me. Right. So they have lost that as an issue. Their candidate is currently on trial for felony crimes in New York State while he awaits other criminal trials to begin behind this case. They don't have any issues to run on. The only strategy they have is to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. So this is a strategy. By undermining the election procedure manual, you make it harder to vote. By then having a election that does not go off smoothly, it then makes it easier to cheat. And that easier to cheat part is so important that people focus on now. Because what I worry about is people are going to wake up in the middle of October or the middle of November and say, oh my God, how come no one was paying attention to the fact that Republicans were setting up our elections to fail so that they could then cheat? Well, I'm here yelling at the top of my lungs, gesturing with both hands, like, look, the hands are off the screen. That Republicans are setting things up now to make it easier to cheat later. And we have to be aware of it now. And it is incumbent on everyone watching this video to stand up in their town square. Not everyone has 2.5 million viewers like Brian Tyler Cohen does. Not everyone has a soapbox with social media with hundreds of thousands of followers, but every one of you can stand up in your town square by posting on Facebook, by posting on social media, by posting on TikTok, by telling your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your customers, your clients, tell them what is happening so that we can stop it now.
And of course, I would just add that if you want to continue gathering that good information, so that you're well informed to be able to do that, to be tribunes for democracy, please sign up for Democracy Docket. Marc, all of his information is in there. It's a great resource. I use it on a daily basis. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.